We work, we sleep, we eat, we drink, we move, we mend, we love, we laugh, we speak, we click, we scroll, we watch, we wait, we win, we lose, we dance, we dream, we cook, we clean, we spend, we save, we care, we cry, we help, we hope. There's a lot to living, but is there more to life than this?
Is that working? Yeah, good morning to you. It's really lovely to have so many people here this morning. I can see some of us are still grabbing our teas and coffees. That's really good. Some of us are slightly in the overflow. I'll wave to you. Some of us are online. That's really good for you to join us. This is our penultimate More to Life week event. We've got Rob Pickering here from Selhurst. He's going to be sharing his story with us in a few minutes. The way the morning's going to work is we're going to have a chat. We're old friends. We've just touched base recently, which is lovely. So we're going to have a chat. You can listen to that if you like. And then we'll have a halftime break where we can have our teas and coffees refilled, have a chat around our tables. And on the screen during the halftime break will appear a slide. Cue the slide. There it is, lovely. And if you've got a camera phone, you can just take a picture of the QR code that will land you on a Slido page. On that page, you can just type in a question that you might have for Rob about what he's just shared. The hashtag is more to life. That's the code. So if you want to do that manually on the web, then hashtag more to life is how you get to that page. So that will be after half time. We'll have all those questions appear on my phone and Rob's phone, and then we can. Rob's happy to answer those. Just a couple of items of housekeeping. There is some children's work going on at the same time. So Blast Kids 1 and 2, that's age 4 to 8. There are still things going on upstairs for you, so if you want to go to that now, please do. Blast Kids 3, you can stay in. Sparklers, which is ages 2 to 4, you can go to the creche now if you like. That's through that door and just around the corridor. The creche is quite obvious there. Focus and Destination, that's secondary school aged children, young people. Young people. You're big enough and old enough to stay in, and Rob's a legend, so you'll agree with me and high-five me even on that one later on. And also, we have a room for toddlers and babies just in the corner there, so if you've got a baby who you just kind of think is being a little fractious because Rob's not very interesting, and whereas we're all putting up with that, your baby's not, then please do use that door in the corner. There are some toys on the floor. It's also on the screen there as well, so you won't miss out. The loos as well, there's an accessible loo just to my left around the corner, so you can use that if you need that. And the other loos are off the corridor behind me. I think I've just about covered everything. Women and children first in the case of the ship sinking. But we're good. Rob, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I wonder whether you could just kick us off and tell us a little bit about your life, where you're from, your childhood, that kind of thing. That would be great.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
That's great. This chair's lovely. I just want to have a kip. Knackered. This is beautiful. I'm going to need to sit forward a bit, Phil. So there we go. Oh. Yeah, so I'm originally from sort of the Catford, Lewisham area. So I was raised in southeast London. Went to a really, really posh school called Sedhill, a legendary school where kids were expelled by the day. It was an interesting experience. So yeah, grew up in southeast London there, and at sort of teenage years, we made the move across to, so we went up in the world. We made the progression to Croydon. See, I knew the catering lot. Yeah, so that's how we landed in Croydon. And I guess life growing up was, a little bit of a bumpy road. So like everybody, always aspiring to do better. My dad trained. He's a military guy, my dad. So fairly strict with us as lads. I've got one brother. So morals were all part of life, trying to keep on the track. But he was always trying to just move forward, move us on. He was an accountant. We got into a situation where he had an opportunity to go to Brazil to be part of a coffee company there. He didn't want to make that move. And life was, from there, this hit a recession in the UK. And it was a difficult time for my dad, actually, a difficult time for us as a family. So I remember things kind of being okay at school, and then we moved on to free school meals, and you sort of felt you were in a bit of a category then. So yeah, I mean, it was a kind of a bumpy road growing up. To give you a little flavour for life growing up, definitely got into some bumps and scrapes. It was the time when you were allowed out on the streets. I don't let my kids out on the streets anymore. But it was that time when you could be out and about. So if I sort of reflect and think of little incidents that I bumped up against, I remember having a bit of a scrap with one lad who said, let's have a fight together. And I remember him saying, let's go over here and have the fight. I don't know why. And I was like, all right, I'll come over there and have a fight. Well, I knew why afterwards. He leant down and he picked up a shard of glass with a wrap round it, and he was ready to have a go. So I was like, I made a quick exit from that one. And I remember being in Catford as well. The McDonald's in Catford, that was a big trip out, that was.
Brilliant.
Yeah. When you sort of are moving up in the world, and I can get to McDonald's. And
so Rob, let me just...
Go on, you cut it.
Just to ask a quick question. Just to fill everyone in on where you are now, you're a minister at Selhurst, aren't you?
Yeah.
Were you a Christian back then?
Growing up, no. Yeah, non-Christian family.
Okay.
No time for God.
Okay.
Just living for myself.
But morally, everything was quite strict.
Just in terms of I didn't want to get in trouble with my dad.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when he couldn't see.
And so, what were the big things for your life back then? What would you live for?
Yeah. So in terms of life, I was living for myself completely and utterly. We still do that now to some degree, even as a Christian. But for me, it was about what could I do to make money and to kind of be more well-connected. So football was a big part of my life. I loved football.
Wow.
It's the reason why I went to Selhurst to be a pastor. It's right by the mighty Selhurst Park. Any Palace fans?
When you say...
Some. Have it. So, oh, come on. I don't want to open up
we
that
could
one.
go on forever.
Yeah, we could. So football was something I really wanted to do. Played at semi-pro level, really enjoyed that. And also
When you say semi-pro, I mean, is that kind of were you being scouted?
Actually, yeah. So there was a head scout at Palace. He was going to come and see me play at Croydon.
Wow.
But I had an injury, football injury. Like, so many stories, you had an injury.
Yeah.
So yeah, God had other plans for me.
Wow.
I'm not saying I could have made it. I might have, who knows. Probably wasn't good enough.
But so semi-pro then?
Yeah, loved football.
You were being paid by the game, were you?
Yeah, so, at that time, you weren't, there wasn't much in it.
Yeah, okay.
It was Croydon, Phil.
Good. And then, so take us on, obviously went through school and sixth form college.
Yeah, so school, sixth form. And then when it sort of came to thinking about what am I going to do with life, where am I going to go, was uni on the cards or not? I didn't have any aspirations for uni.
No.
I had aspirations for money. But I got some placement work in London for a design firm. So I had the football going on and very much was was loving theatre as well, so I was working with a theatre company.
Wow.
But in the midst of all of that, I was working for a design company doing this placement work in Soho, actually. So real place of darkness, lots of contrast going on, record companies everywhere, but real sin and nastiness around the corner. But it was in that whole situation, at the age of about 18, 19, that I met a Christian, or a bunch of Christians.
Huh. Was that at work? Was that sort of, you just bumped into them? How did you?
Yeah, so I bumped into them on the street, two of them.
Wow.
Who just talked to me about God. And I guess I'd had a belief that there was a God, but that was it. I remember praying one prayer. I thought about that driving over here this morning. And it's such a horrible prayer. I don't even want to admit to it, but I will admit to it. And I prayed and said to God, if you can make me this rich by the time I get to 30, I'll give you a quarter back. Wow. That's the only prayer I ever remember praying. I was trying to do a kind of a bargain with God. Sort me out and I'll do you a favour.
Wow.
So it was in that scenario that I met two Christians, but it got to the third one, and I just thought, I think God's talking to me. Like, that was the unmistakable thing, that God was kind of knocking at the door.
Wow.
And in that scenario, this guy, he mentioned he was a Christian. We were talking about some consultancy work, and he said to me, I'd be interested to do a bit more consultancy work. And these words came out of my mouth. I'm not interested in that, but can you tell me more about you being a Christian? I want to know about it. Because it was the third person who'd spoken to me. I wish people said that to me, come up to me and said, could you tell me about being a Christian? Instead of punching your lights out when you try and talk to them.
Wow.
So that's the beginning of my journey to faith.
Huh. So were you were still working for the design firm then?
Yeah.
And doing well in that?
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. It was placement work, part of the training for stuff I was going to do.
And things with theatre company?
All going on in the background.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was, I loved doing it. It was good fun. And so when for anyone who's ever had any dabblings in the theatre, film industry, any of that stuff, you're just trying different avenues, so I'm conscious of the people over there. Hello, don't walk back to you. But you're just putting stuff out there all the time. So yeah. I was with a theatre company, I was with an extras agency, I was trying to do some work around that sort of stuff too. But actually, that was kind of a little bit later on. Here in this moment where I was working for this design firm and chatting to this guy, it was that really was a life-changing moment.
Wow. And when you say life-changing moment, you weren't a Christian. You were talking to these Christians about life, about more to life. And obviously you're a Christian now. So what was that? Describe that change point. Describe that moment when you went from God out of my picture life to God being big on my radar life.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget it because I can sit back now. I won't fall asleep. So I was chatting with this guy. His name was Roger. He's with the Lord now. And when I asked him that question, tell me about you being a Christian, he talked to me about how he had become a Christian. But more than that, he went on to tell me why it was so important for me to consider life that Jesus gives. And I'll never forget this. He just said to me, Rob, there's a verse in the Bible, and it says, it's Romans, there's a book in the Bible called Romans, chapter 3, verse 23, and it just says, all have sinned and fallen short of God's standards, every single one of us. And he said to me, the word all there means you and me and everybody. But when he just looked at me and said, that means you, Rob, you've fallen short of God's standards. And actually, you might not realize this, but the life that you have been living, that's not been right before God. And Southeast Londoners, I think particularly, you've always got an answer for stuff, you're thinking on your feet. But I couldn't actually say anything to him in those moments. It was like he'd punched me in the stomach just by telling me that one Bible verse. And I was kind of, not a terrible lad because, my dad, military guy, morals, trying to steer us down a certain path. And yet at the same time, just living for self, holidays away, going out at the weekend, getting battered, girls, that stuff. But in that moment, when he said to me, Rob, you've fallen short of God's standards, that's what the Bible tells us, and that includes you, I was winded. And so, yeah, That was kind of a really convicting moment. And I kind of realised in that moment that I've got sin in my life. Things I've thought about, said, done, and God's seen all of that. But up until that point, I hadn't really been thinking about God seeing my life being played out actually before him on a video screen.
And just for those of you who kind of getting our heads around that word sin, it's an attitude that cuts God out of our lives. That's what the Bible means. It's a heart thing that says, look, God, I'm going to build this concrete ceiling. I don't want you there. I'm going to live life under my rules in my way. And that's what that verse pointed out, that you were, in that sense, someone who had got the concrete ceiling working and cutting God out of your life. So
yeah, definitely.
You realize that. That hit you. You realize that was your attitude to God. So is that what makes you a Christian then? Just realizing that that's your attitude to God?
No, definitely not. And I can really resonate with that whole sin thing because that wasn't really in my world. And I guess just to build on that, I remember I got a posh guy who was in my church. He's like you. He's really well spoken. And I remember him saying his little acronym for sin was shove off, I'm in charge, no to your rules.
Yeah.
And that was, so you're right, that was me.
Yeah.
But although that was the bad news,
yeah.
He didn't stop there. And so he said to me, Rob, I need to tell you that. And I was quiet, I was listening to that. But he said to me, so here's the great news, and this is why Jesus came into the world. What are you going to do with all these things, your attitude, your heart? Are you accountable for that? One day you've got to stand before God and give an account for your life. So I effectively said to him, what do I do to get myself sorted with God? Like, what's the way forward? What's the way out of this? And that's when he said, look, this is why Jesus came into the world. He came into the world and he died on a cross so that you might be forgiven. And so he explained to me, this is the first time I'd ever heard this, and in those moments it blew me away. That he explained to me that a man called Jesus came into the world and took the right sort of punishment that I deserved for the stuff I'd done wrong and for my heart attitude to God. And he was willing to take the rap for that and to absorb the whole lot in order that I could be forgiven and have life. And I remember, like it was yesterday, I was sitting in a small office above a French delicatessen on Brewer Street. And there was like a peep show just down the road there, and there was something else down the road here. It was a real contrast, and yet in all of that, it was like light had come into the room. And so he explained to me Jesus, but he then went on to say to me that you can come just as you are and ask for forgiveness. Like you don't have to pay anything, you don't have to dress in a certain way. You can come just as you are. And so I was sitting in that office and said, I don't really know what to pray. I don't pray, apart from the prayer I told you about. I didn't tell him about that prayer. I feel bad now. So he helped me to pray because I wasn't a praying guy. And I just literally said to God, I'm really sorry. And I asked him to forgive me. And I think we all have very different experiences. I mean, my wife grew up in a Christian home and she became a Christian, and she's like a woman that's described in the Bible called Lydia, who it said of her that the Lord opened her heart gently, and so she didn't have this great big conversion experience. She's a Christian, she loves the Lord. Whereas mine was a real sharp contrast, and probably because my life was so far away from God. But I remember coming away from that meeting, I walked through Leicester Square. You could kind of take a diagonal path through to where Capital Radio used to be. It might still be there. But it was like I was walking on a foot of air. It was a really strange experience. And there's an old hymn, you may not know it, but there's a line in the hymn. It says, something lives in every hue that Christless eyes have never seen. There's something everywhere that God has made that you just haven't seen before. And it was like that for me. I kind of noticed stuff like the sky and trees and thought, whoa. It was a real blow-away experience for me. So I went home and told my brother. My brother's about 18 months older than me. He was like, I'll give you a couple of weeks. You'll be back on the beers. This is, I'm not having this. And about 6 weeks later, my brother, all I could do is I couldn't explain the gospel. I didn't know the Bible. I just said, come and meet this guy, and he'll tell you about Jesus. and he met this same guy, walked him through the gospel, and my brother came to faith. He became a Christian.
Wow.
So he told my parents, and about 6 months after that, my mum came to church and she came to faith. And 7 years after that, my dad came to faith.
Wow.
So from the youngest up to the oldest, like God sorted out my family, which was, very precious.
So, obviously, over that time, they noticed that your life had become different. What do you think they were noticing?
Good question. I think I'd probably answer from my brother's perspective. I didn't get back out on the beers like he was expecting. And probably just my attitude of heart in terms of temper and anger, possibly a little bit less selfish than I already was, maybe. But I probably think most of all it would have been that this was a big deal. This was the real thing. I hadn't lost my head. I hadn't been transformed into a robot. I was still Rob. I still loved footy. So yeah. But there was just a sense in which, I was like right off the bat, bam! I went to church. Never missed church. Loved going to church. That was it. That was in the diary. Like that was stamped. Nothing was getting in the way of that.
Wow.
So yeah. So rather than waking up at 1 o'clock just in time for a Sunday lunch because you've been out the night before, the night before was gone in that way. Wow. I was up into church and Sunday lunch tasted better.
So just explain that you during this time you were changing jobs and you were going to church. What was the transition going on there in terms of work from design to church into serving in church and things like that?
Yeah,
What was going on there?
Yeah. Well, so the whole experience of becoming a Christian was definitely life-changing. So, and that kind of fed into everything that I had been pursuing. Yeah. So I was pursuing money, I was pursuing wanting to be well-known, trying to make it forward in life, and things were going well. I was doing stuff with a band, we were doing records, we had interest from a couple of publishers, I was in the theatre industry. In that whole industry, you're just putting your feelers out, you're trying stuff. Yeah. And so, I guess it was in the midst of that, in terms of sort of job stuff, acting work was starting to come in. When I say acting work, extra work, so you're just trying to get in and around the film scene. Can I just say, by the way, that was a really exciting time. I loved it.
Yeah, go on.
So got to do stuff. So I loved it. I was working on a film about Charlie Chaplin with Robert Downey Jr. That was great. Wow. It was good to meet him. I played a lord at the Hackney Empire. And I found that really interesting because I was a South East Londoner from Croydon, and I was playing this lord at the Hackney Empire. That was great. Listen, you won't remember this, but some people, I'm really hoping some people from Pickering might remember this. I got offered 20 quid extra to bite into a hot dog standing behind a geezer called Arthur Daly in a program called Minder. That's how things were moving on for me. I thought, he's moving in the right direction. Anyone remember Minder? I can't believe you admitted that. So all that stuff was great fun. I did a film with Rick Moranis and Catherine Zeta-Jones called Splitting Heirs, and I was playing a guest at their wedding. So I loved all that was really exciting, and so there was a really big pull to that. I think my most exciting thing was I got to wrestle a lady called Joan Worley-Kilmer to the floor. She was about to stab someone in a film. The Perfumer Affair, I think that was the name of the film. So we're in a sort of a nightclub scene, and she's like gets to pick up a knife, and I get to do that. So all really exciting stuff. And I think in the midst of all of that, I'd become a Christian, and it was then that I got offered a part in a film. So I read for a part in a film with Kevin Bacon and Rosie Perez. Wow. And I saw the script, and it meant going off to New York to film. And I thought, I've got to go and speak to the pastor about this. But there's a couple of moody scenes in the film, and I was thinking, this is my big break, I really want it. But he just asked me one question and said, would you be happy for your church family to go and see that film with you in it? I was like, why did you ask me that question for? And I knew the answer was no. So I wrote to the director and just said, look, I'm a Christian, so I'm not going to take this part. So I turned it down. And really, that was a closing of the doors of it, of kind of just moving in that direction.
Yeah.
But so it was really saying, I've got to walk away from this. It's not where I can continue going if I'm going to follow God. That was for me. There's loads of Christians who are in film and theatre, but for me, that wasn't the direction I was going in. Wow. So I landed in an investment bank in the city.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was on the trading floor of an investment bank, Morgan Stanley, in Canary Wharf.
Wow. Was that just through connections? And
It was through connections.
Yeah,
It's who you know, right?
Yeah, oh, totally.
Yeah, I mean, you got to nail the interview, but yeah, I mean, God was really kind. The door opened for me, so I went onto the trading floor, really just assisting the traders in Canary Wharf.
So, putting it bluntly, you tried football.
This is a story.
You tried fame and didn't manage it. How did you do with fortune?
Well, look at me.
Didn't manage it.
I had to get this in the sale. But look, yeah, so, I mean, I loved working in the bank. It was great. It was really good fun. And yet, there was just still something different. I'd become a Christian, and so all of this was working itself out. And when you're in the trading floor, that there's two ways to become a trader. You either come through like a posh school, you know.
I know that.
All right, yeah. Or you work alongside the traders, and it's a little bit like the mafia. You know, they give you the nod if you get on with the traders, and so you basically end up trading. They call them barra boys. You came in through the posh route, or you came through a side entrance. So love being on the trading floor, working with these guys, and for me, financially and from a career point of view, the big break came when the senior traders invited me out to go to Spurs, and but to go to Spurs and to sit in the box there and be part of their sort of basically drug-fueled, drink-fueled day out. You know, you're starting well before the game kicks off, and you're staying around way after. And there's other things involved in that too. And I just thought, this is like, when you get that sort of an invitation, you're kind of on the road to getting the nod from the traders, and they're like, okay, this boy might start trading. But I knew as a Christian that I was putting myself in temptation's way. And that was kind of my old life. And again, I never forget, he's a geezer, Mickey, and I said to him, thanks for the invite, but I'm going to pass on it. And you know when someone's really surprised, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I said, no, Mick, look, I'm a Christian, and it's not going to be for me, mate.
Wow.
And it's interesting, he said to me, can we go and have lunch together? So we went and had lunch together, and he was one of the few people who wanted to know a bit more about me being a Christian, because he was saying to me, are you sure about this? How can you do this and turn away from that? So we really had a good chat together about that. But really, that whole idea of, again, pursuing something, it sort of changed. I still loved it in the bank, but I never forget looking out across the River Thames from the office, and just at that point, sort of in my early 20s, a few years into being a Christian, just saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? God, I just, I like the work, but I want to serve you. Mm-hmm. And so just praying along those lines. It's quite a sterile place. The banks are really set up for you to live there. You know, there's a dry cleaners, a barber's. You can just stay there all the time, and people do. You know, they get a flat just opposite the office. So it's really built so you can live in the building. So I'd arrive at the Japanese market, work through London, stay to the New York market, and you can just stay and make money.
Wow. And so, again, we keep coming back to this point that you are a minister now.
Yeah.
So you didn't stay in working for the bank.
No. So ultimately, I kind of had one move in terms of work before going into working for God at a church. And in the midst of all of that, I was just praying about what God wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And I got involved in youth ministry at our local church.
Yeah.
So really, really enjoyed doing that. Doing sport with boys particularly was great. Getting lads off the street was good fun. I guess it was in the middle of doing all of that, the minister of the church where I'm at now just said to me, look, Rob, have you thought about doing some sort of training for ministry? And that really was going on whilst I was at the bank. So I did. I began sort of a distance learning course at a Bible college. So I was trying to work through the Japanese, London and New York market and trying to study New Testament Greek, and my brain was frazzled. And so it was really through doing that training that an opening came at the church for me to work alongside the minister, which I did. So I just gave it all up and started at the church.
Wow. So just tell us a little bit about your family now.
So married to Rachel, got three children, Sam, Tom and Grace, who are, Sam's nearly 18, Tom 15, Grace is going to be 9.
Wow.
And I've been at the church, in terms of at the church, probably 30 plus years.
Wow.
17 years in ministry, so 5 years as an assistant, 12 as the pastor.
Wow.
My oldest boy is miles away from God. That breaks my heart. Yeah. My other two are following on with God.
They go to Fulham Boys' School?
So
that's a free school, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
That's set up by a bunch of Christians.
Yep.
But it's a state school sponsored by. Is that much different to a normal state school?
I mean, I think it's great. It's a Christian school, so that's brilliant. There's a lot of Christian input. But I think what's really lovely about the school, I've got a passion for it because we've been trying for 5 years to open a Christian school in Croydon and unfortunately been hitting dead ends. But I think the lovely thing about the school is that they're trying to just give boys from all backgrounds a sort of a level of education that might only be usually seen in a private school. So just, lots of opportunity, lots of contact. A real focus on teaching, and a focus on teaching for boys. So one of the things they recognised actually was just that in some schools, teaching can be very much geared and wired towards the way that girls learn, but that boys don't always connect with that. And so I think that's been really thrilling for the lads.
So let's move on to 15th of September 2017. You were on your way to discuss this free school that you were trying to set up in Croydon. And you were going to discuss that with the headmaster at Fulham Boys' School. Mm-hmm. Tell us what happened on that morning.
So set off early in the morning from Croydon. Had a few little delays, unexpected delays on the way. I was going with another guy from the church. He was coming along with me, a guy called Philip. We got to Croydon, we sort of said to ourselves, right, should we take the tram and go to Wimbledon that way? Should we, go into town and cut across? We kind of settled on, let's take the tram, let's get to Wimbledon, and then we'll take a tube from there into Fulham. We got to Wimbledon via the tram, saw 2 tube trains there. So we had our pick, and we thought the one on the right-hand side was leaving second, and the one on the left was going first. So we went to the tube train on the left, only to see the one on the right pull out first. How did we make that mistake? But I believe that God was involved in that. And again, it's really clear in my mind. It just feels a little bit like yesterday. I remember we were pulling into Parsons Green. I was just chatting with this guy, Phil, just smiling away, talking. I can't remember what we were talking about. And then I just smelt a funny smell in the carriage, just a really pungent smell. And then boom. So that was like a microsecond. It was like a funny smell and then boom. And I was standing about, 15 foot from a bomb that had been placed in the carriage. So it was effectively like a big paint bucket, and it had been filled with like nails, screws, broken bits of knives, forks. So the whole idea of the device is that the explosion goes off, and all that shrapnel gets sucked up and then just spreads in the carriage. Wow. So it's kind of really designed to wipe everyone out.
So we did manage to find footage of what went on in the carriage. I think we've got it up on the screen behind us.
Ahmed Hassan wouldn't watch this video of the fireball created when his device partially detonated. He claimed it was never his intention to hurt anyone. The jury saw pictures of the bomb, made from the highly volatile explosive TATP, still burning. They saw the nails, bolts and knives packed as shrapnel around it. Like the police, they didn't believe him.
If it had detonated properly, I'm in no doubt that we would be dealing with mass casualties and mass fatalities on that particular underground train on that day.
And do you believe that was his intention?
Absolutely, I believe it was his intention. My experts have looked at that device. It was a viable bomb. It's only through good fortune that it didn't detonate properly.
Wow.
Wow. So the bomb goes off, you're 15 feet from it. Were you injured at all?
No, not at all.
No.
No.
What was going through your mind at that second afterwards?
It's really interesting. I mean, everything slowed down. So, I mean, we just saw that clip and it just happens quickly. But it's so funny just even to see it again, because in reality, it feels like that's taking like 30 seconds to happen. So even the explosion, like the whole, from the floor to the ceiling was just fire. I just remember that. And it felt like a fireball rushing towards us. And it just felt like impending doom. I think that was the thing, like, you know, and it's hard to process it all, but it's all very slowed down. And then so everyone's screaming, everyone's panicking. Because it had just pulled into Parsons Green, people on the platform from the outside looking in are, you know, hysterical. So there's a mass stampede on the platform, and people actually got more injured that way. Just getting crushed. One lady, I remember seeing her on the stairs. And I just remember seeing a woman with her child in a pram, and she was just rooted to the spot. She was just shell-shocked. So some people ran. She was one of the ladies who just looked bewildered, you know. So I just remember going up to her and just putting a hand on her shoulder and saying, "You okay?" And just walked off with her. Interestingly, I believe in God's planning. I'd been to a anti-terrorist training event with the Met a few months before. And some of that stuff came flooding back into my head, like what to do in this scenario. So I saw a Transport for London employee who was, I mean, he's human like the rest of us, you know, he's just looking in a total shock and state. And we were all wondering what was going on. And I think in my mind, I was wondering about the secondary blast. So often there can be a secondary blast. And that's why I saw people literally climbing over spiked fences to get out of the station that way, because you're wondering what's coming next. But the thing that popped into my mind from the training was just to get everyone as safely and quickly as possible away from the area because of a secondary blast. So I spoke to this TfL guy and just said to him, "Look, mate, you've got to make an announcement, like calm, but quickly evacuate the station. That's what you've got to do." And he was like, "Yeah, you're right, brilliant, thank you, good." And that's, you know, that's what happened.
Wow.
So we left the station, Phil and I, and actually we went downstairs, we stood outside Parsons Green, and we just said, "Let's have a prayer time together, let's just pray." And we prayed for the people who'd been closest to the bomb. One lady in particular, she was quite an iconic image, she had her hair burnt, and we just prayed for everybody's sort of health and safety, physically and mentally. And we prayed that Ahmad Hassan would be caught. We didn't know that was his name at the time, but we just said, "Lord, whoever's done this, you know, give wisdom, skill to our forces, may they be caught." And they were the two big things that we prayed outside the station.
Wow. And since you've tried to meet up with him, have you?
Yeah, so we made attempts to see if we could get to see him, to talk to him, and then hopefully tell him about the love of God and his kindness. But they wouldn't let us see him. And it's because from their perspective, we could be spinning a yarn and we just want to get revenge. So it's for his safety, yeah.
So how afterwards, how did it affect you?
I think that night when I went to sleep, sort of images in your mind, you sort of put your head on the pillow, particularly the explosion. And I was wondering, obviously being a pastor and having pastored into situations, whether there'd be a delayed shock. But, you know, just cracked on, was fine. I remember going on the tube for the first time after that. I mean, I made sure I went back to it quickly. Phil and I went and visited Parsons Green again, and we just went there and said, "Thank you, God, for preserving our lives." Yeah.
Wow. And so, have you ever wondered about what would have happened if you hadn't, if you had been caught up in the blast and you hadn't got off that train alive and healthy?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I think what struck me was I thought about other people who haven't walked away from a blast like that. And I thought they didn't get to go home and see their wives again. They didn't get home to hug their kids. And I found that really emotional. That I got to walk back in, and I think that's when I cried. I saw my wife, and just to hold her in my arms, I thought there's lots of people that didn't get to do this. And in terms of if that had been the last day, I think here's the lovely thing about being a Christian. You know where you're going. You have life with Jesus in this life, but you have confidence in death. And I don't mean by that Christians are never afraid to die. I've had a few moments where I've felt like I'm going to die and scared the life out of me. But the good thing about being a Christian is that God makes a really precious promise about what happens next. And so that gives me great comfort and assurance. And I think from a church perspective, I never forget one guy praying in the church and just saying, thank you for sparing us sorrow upon sorrow, that our pastor didn't get taken and one of the church elders at the same time. Yeah.
And so I tell you what, just before we have a break then, has that moment changed you? Have you been able to process it properly?
Yeah, I've processed it a fair bit. I think I've thought lots about if I'd gone then, that would have been it then. And so the language doesn't feel quite right, but this is another chance. I've got to live on. So God's got a plan for me, and I want to try and make the most of the time, so that's probably in my mind. I think what also struck me is it's quite easy to talk to people about this. I've thought about the many opportunities God's given me to talk about dying, that situation, a big event where life comes to an end. And it's given me lots of opportunity to talk about, actually, there's going to be another moment in time, different to the tube train, which God talks about, that life here doesn't go on forever, and our lives do come to an end. And it's made me think a lot about that. Actually, I can talk to people about this event, this drama, but there's another bigger event coming that's not a terrorist bomber. It's a God of love who's working in our world and who's going to send his son a second time.
Yeah. And in that sense, it's I guess this is what this whole week has been about. Just the truth that there is more to life. There is more to life, that you can reflect on staring death in the face and say, actually, do you know what? There is more to life than even death. And that hope is a concrete certainty.
It's sweet.
It's not cross your fingers and hope. There's a concreteness, a certainty, a fullness about the Christian hope when faced with death, and that's just the greatest joy. Rob, thank you so much just for sharing that story. We're going to just take a 10-minute break now, or probably 5 to 10 minutes. I'll gauge when people are needing to ask questions properly. But that slide is going to appear on the screen. We'll have teas and coffees being brought around as well. Do have a chat with people on your table. There's some nibbles. There are also some things, some resources on the table, so some things for you to read on the table as well, if that helps you. So just we'll be back in between 5 and 10 minutes. Lovely. Brilliant. Well, oh, that's big. It's so good to see so many conversations going on, and we've had a number of really great questions coming in, I think Rob's competent enough to keep on answering the questions as they come in. So if one strikes you as he's talking, do tap it in. But we'll kick off with just the first question, which is a great one. And obviously, what you can do is you can vote for questions as well by tapping on the thumbs up sign as they come up. But the first question, the most popular question, is what's up there?
It's just changed.
It's just changed. Dramatic. You could be running rings around me. Okay, let's go for that one. Do you have any advice or counsel for those of us who have non-Christian families, but who haven't come to Christ even decades after we have?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'm praying for my son, and I'm just continually praying that God will work in his life and his situation, because I've never seen my son so unhappy as I have since he turned away from walking with God. So just cracking on praying for him.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it's God who changes people's hearts fills me with hope. If it was about us trying to get to heaven and us trying to get life, and it was down to our performance or what we did, I'd be discouraged because we mess up so much. But because truth about life and more to life is that God it's not about us getting up there, but that he's come from there down to here to help. Gives me great hope. He's the one who changes lives. And I just think there's loads of stories of people who you're not expecting to be changed, whose lives change. And I'm like, straight up, I am an unlikely convert. You know, like when people, even back from school days, find out Rob Pickering became a Christian, like they're like, nah, that geezer didn't become a Christian. You know, when they find out that I'm a pastor of a church in Selhurst, they're like, not that fella. Like, yeah. So I look in the mirror, and that gives me, hold on. And I look in the mirror and it gives me hope, not my face, but I look in the mirror and I see that God, if God can change my heart, you know, God can change anyone's heart. So that gives me loads of hope. And I think actually, there's so many encouraging stories. I've got to quickly share this. How are we doing on the clock, Phil? I've got to share a couple of stories. One story about a guy who prayed for his son for years. His son did a runner, went overseas, had no time for God. He gets a phone call from his son one day and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm home." And the dad's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming back." I think he was in Australia. And he's like, "No, Dad, I'm home. I've come back to God. Like, God's transformed my life, you know." And I've just heard a situation recently of, I think it was an elder in a church in Wales. And his boy was miles away from God. And he was basically lying in a ditch by a roadside, just looking up in the sky, taking drugs. He was smashed up with drink, possibly going to die. And he's just laying down there, and in that moment, he's like, what am I doing? What is going on? And he just looked up, and God just dealt with him on a roadside, pouring rain, I think it was, just, probably left to die, and just changed his life around. And there are continuing stories of that people you don't expect. But I think God does the work. God changes people's hearts, and that's why. That gives me great hope that God can change the hardest of hearts. I remember once, I've got to tell this, I was doing some work in our local area. We just go out and chat to people and say, you know, we're from the church, how you doing? And I remember meeting this one guy, and he was a taxi driver, and he had like, his forearms were the same size as my waist. And I think he had love and hate, you know, tattooed on his knuckles. And I was like, I don't want to talk to this geezer. And I walked up to him. He was my last person to talk to. And big old giant, and he was like, seemed melted in his heart. And then it just poured all out of him, that life was tough. He'd been thinking a load of stuff. And the day before, he'd just said a really simple prayer, "God, if you're there, help me." And then God sends me the next, he could have sent any Christian, but next day, the Christian comes to see him. So, yeah, just don't give up hope. I'm talking to myself here because sometimes it breaks your heart, doesn't it, if your kids are away from, or any family members, doesn't have to be kids, but if you've got family members away from God, it's heartbreaking. But what God can do, that gives me great hope.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. So next question is, to a non-Christian, giving up beer and going to church every Sunday sounds dreadful. Would you have thought the same beforehand?
Before I became a Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought. But can I just say, I haven't given up beer. I just drink a different amount. There's nothing better, is there? You know, a hot summer's day and then like a nice cold one. Yeah, sorry if I've offended anyone.
Strawberries and Pimm's for us, darling. Yeah.
Oh, mate. Hold up, I'm just going to put you on my prayer list.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Thanks for also clarifying that one as well, that you don't have to be teetotal in order to be a Christian. I think it's really important to make that distinction.
Yeah. Just on the church thing, though, I think when God gets a hold of your heart, you just, you realise that actually being at church is great. You know, it's not until you come along and you find out what it's all about and you give it a crack for a while that you actually realise God is really, really good. And I often say to people, like, we've got people coming to our church at the moment. One mum in the community who just lost her boy. He's 18, and she's been coming along, and she's found it so helpful, just being in church. And I think a lot of the time we're plugged in and wired into this kind of 24/7 life. And just on that very level, we found people have found it helpful out of the 168 hours we get every week, just to take 1 hour out or an hour and a half out. I think God can really bless that.
Thank you so much. So you talked about working for God in that you work for the church. Didn't you think you could work for God in the normal workplace, such as the bank or acting?
No, absolutely you can. Yeah, sorry if I misconveyed that, not at all. I think for me what it was that we need Christians all over the shop, don't we?
Yeah.
In the workplace. For me, the burden was just that I was meant to be doing something else. Yeah. So particularly the work that I believe God had for me to do was in the church.
And I had a similar. I was a teacher and a Christian, and the reason why I'm here now is because I was teaching this Shakespeare sonnet, and it suddenly struck me that I could teach Shakespeare sonnets for the rest of my life, and that's not wrong, by the way. But for me...
Is it my book? Sorry, mate. A Shakespeare sonnet?
Yeah, absolutely. I love my Shakespeare, I love my sonnets. And suddenly it just hit me, I could do this for the rest of my life. But actually, what I want to do most of all is tell people about Jesus. Yeah. And neither is wrong, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that brought me on the road to this work.
Absolutely. And every work is vital. And that's the great thing, isn't it? God just uses all sorts of people in all sorts of places. Yeah. Posh boys and South East Londoners.
Oh, good. I'm glad I invited you.
Yeah, first and last time. I'm going to bang the drum, brother. I'm going to bang the drum.
I'll pay for the taxi. Have you? A bit of a tongue-in-cheek question. Have you played your quarterback yet?
I didn't get the 400 million.
Oh, that's good.
I was greedy.
So here's another one. What's something you wish you would have said to a non-Christian when you had the chance? What would you say now?
I think, definitely regret moments where I just haven't been a little bit more real about people's lives. I think that we can bottle it when we're talking to people about life and what comes after life. And I think for me, I've realised that's because it's rooted in pride in my heart, because I'm more concerned about what they think about what I'm going to tell them than I am about their soul. When I was working in the city, I tried to force myself every night of the weekday to give out 5 little leaflets about Jesus. I'd get off the train at East Croydon, and just in the walk from the platform up the gangway and out of the station, I just would give out a leaflet and say, I think this might be one of the most important things that you'll ever read. And I hope it works for you or something like that. But to try to keep it a bit natural so you didn't seem like a weirdo. But every time I did it, I worked out I gave out 100 a month or whatever, but every time I did it, in my head was, they're going to think you're a nutcase. And so I didn't want to do it, but yet I did want to do it. So I think that would be the thing. To tell people, to talk to people about, have you thought about life after death, and get to it a bit more. I think we can sometimes, I'm guilty of this, we can spend forever being friends with non-Christians, and we actually don't really have the conversation. I wish I'd say more to guys, particularly, not have you read the Bible, but have you read the Bible with someone? It's that little bit on the end is really different. I found a lot of people can say, yeah, I've seen the Bible, I've read the Bible, but not a lot of fellas will say, or ladies would say, yeah, I've read the Bible with someone else. Yeah. And then you can just say, do you want to get together?
Yeah.
So I think I'm trying to make myself do that more.
Yeah, that's so good. And here's quite a poignant question. What would you say to the terrorist who let off that bomb, if you had the chance?
Yeah, so we thought about that if we got a chance to see him. And I think that we ultimately would want to explain to him why we'd come to see him. The reason we'd come to see him is because we're Christians. And the reason that we were able to even be there and face him, not with hatred, is because of what God had done in our hearts. And then just talk to him about the fact that, there's hope and forgiveness. I mean, it's a massive question, actually, but because what's going on in that guy's heart, to make him do that. But I think we'd have loved to have told him about the hope of forgiveness. The fact that he could hear that from people who he tried to kill, I think God can use powerfully, because he has done before with lots of people. You can think of missionaries, Jim Elliot's wife, going back to people they'd murdered. I think it was just a chance to say to him, this is why we're here, this is what we want to say. Yeah. And show him that actually it's because of God that we don't want to punch his lights out. Yeah.
But want to forgive him. That's very powerful.
Yeah.
And then, we're slightly kind of coming to the end of our time together. Just a couple more questions. What about the school, actually? There's a lot of interest in that. Are there any plans still ongoing to start a Christian school in Croydon?
Yeah, I'm going to try and have a few conversations. COVID's put a big dent in it. Croydon said there wasn't a need for a Christian school. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But we're in conversations. We were before the lockdown with the Diocese of Southwark.
Wow.
That's another minefield. So yeah, we're gonna see whether something can happen.
Great.
Yeah.
And then one last question, because you've been speaking of confidence in the face of death, confidence at that point of that bomb going off. What do you think will happen to you after we die then?
Yeah, so my confidence is in what God tells me in his word. So I have confidence in the Bible. There's lots of lovely verses that spring to mind. I was thinking about this yesterday at a conference we were at, where a geezer called Paul, a Christian geezer called Paul, says that to live, like to truly have life, is to be in a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And to die is gain. Like that's a big statement.
Yeah.
Goes on to say that actually when we go from this life, we go away from our bodies. Our bodies are like an earth suit that really hold who we really are, our soul, our spirit. But we get to be forever with God. So I do believe that we get to be with God, which is amazing. And my former minister, I love this little phrase he used to say, that we go from the land of the dying to the land of the living. We think this is life. But actually we leave here as Christians. If you're a Christian and you've got that safety in God, you go from the land of the dying to the land of the living. And I had the privilege of taking a Thanksgiving service for a Christian in our church just before Christmas. And I also had the privilege of being with this same lady and holding her hand as she went from this life to the next life. And in the days leading up to her leaving this world, I was struck as a minister, one of the privileges of her confidence in the face of death, her telling consultants and surgeons about Jesus Christ, telling them of her hope, and singing hymns. I remember walking in and visiting this lady, and she was singing "To God be the glory, great things he has done." And the lady was like, "Oh, this, she's got a really good voice." And I'll never forget. I won't forget it because it was on my birthday. And I held this lady's hand, and she just said these 5 words: "The Lord is my shepherd." They were the last words she said. And she just breathed out her last. And she went to be with the Lord. And actually, that's one of the best birthday presents I've ever had. To witness that process going on, that confidence in the face of death. And I think that as Christians we can fear dying, we can fear the process of dying. People often ask me in my church about why do I still feel scared sometimes, even as a Christian, about dying. I think God gives us dying grace. He just can really help us in those moments. And actually, I remember the service at church for this lady. Christians actually rejoicing, at that, and her family doing that too. And it's poignant because you see this confidence in the face of death. And it's where are we now? We're into March. We're talking about 3 months ago. The lady was my mum, and so it struck me that my mum's confidence was like that. But I saw the same again. So just after Christmas, my grandmother, she went to be with the Lord. So 2 deaths really close in the family, and you feel the pain of it, like we felt the pain of it. I mean, I'm broken, my mum not being here. But actually, that pain is tempered by, it's balanced by the hope of life after death. And so that's, that thrills my heart. And that gives me confidence after this life.
And I think that works well with the story from the Bible that I wanted to read this morning, just to finish on, and I'll be quick. The story comes from a bit of the Bible where Jesus, it's about Jesus, obviously, when he gets this message that his friend Lazarus is sick, and he starts walking towards Bethany, where his friend is sick, and then he gets another message: Lazarus has passed away. And the story goes like this: on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews, that's religious people, had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That's the first thing she says is, "Look, where have you been? Because you have the power to heal him." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Now she thinks that he's talking about what happens after you die. So she says, "Well, I know he's going to rise again at the resurrection, at the last day." So in her worldview, what would happen when you die is you would die, and then there's this great day of resurrection when everybody's brought to life and judged by God. And then Jesus says this staggering thing, and I find it just the most either prodigiously arrogant, as in just arrogance beyond all arrogance, or the words of someone who say they can actually do this. Because he says this: I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. In other words, he's saying, do you know, I'm not just going to be at this resurrection day that you believe in. I am going to be the reason it's going to happen. And it's can you imagine someone like Rob saying that? Do you know what I mean? He's had a great life. I have the power to raise everyone from the dead. An ordinary person doesn't say that. You're either mad, bad, or you're God. There is no getting around a statement like that. Either you're mad to believe that that's going to happen, and you have got that power, or you're kidding everybody, and you've conned everyone, so that makes you evil, or you're God. And he says this: I am the resurrection and the life. I have the power. The reason why the resurrection will happen is because of me. And he says, the one who believes in me will live on that day, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And the question is, do you believe it? I love Jesus. He's just really simple, really clear. The invitation is this: at the moment of crisis, at the moment of I don't know what happens to me when I die. And actually, to be honest, the last 2 years have just brought that right to the forefront of our minds. This whole pandemic has just been clicking in. Am I going to get the virus next? Am I going to be the one who actually doesn't survive it? And then this war from the Ukraine, it's putting us all on edge. What's going to happen if Putin presses the button? We're back into the early days of the 80s with the Cold War. What happens if the Russians press the button and nuke us all? It's bringing this whole idea of what happens when we die to the real forefront of our minds. And, I think Rob's wonderfully said, alcohol doesn't answer that question. Football is a hopeless thing to put your trust in. Fortune doesn't work. Fame is not lasting. Why? Because you have to chase these things, and when they don't work out, they crush you if you have no other hope. And even when they do work out, look at fame. Actually, if you're chasing fame, you've got to chase fame and keep chasing fame. And your fear is that when you don't become famous, you fall back into obscurity. Fame, when you have it, is just a poisoned chalice. There is no hope in fame. But Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the only hope in life. And I am the only hope in death. Isn't that a phenomenal claim? And then the story goes on to this. Let me just finish on this. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to Lazarus' tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor because he's been there 4 days. He's properly dead. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I say this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me. When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. It's a phenomenal story. And Jesus basically could have said that prodigiously arrogant thing, I am the resurrection and the dead, and walked away. But just to make sure that actually we all believe he is the resurrection and the dead, he gives us a sign. He gives us the raising of Lazarus. And a little while later, he gives us a greater sign, because he himself was killed. that people like you and I can know God personally, just like Rob does. And then 3 days later, he rises from the dead. And the logic is this. If I promise you a resurrection, and I have risen, if you believe in me, you will rise. That's the promise. And I don't ask you to believe in that now. I hope it's at least just challenged you to think about life after death, to think about more to life. And if you want to find out more, we've got some resources on the table there. Do take one of those. There's a small one called Life. That's on your tables. Do take one, and there's Mark's Gospels on your tables as well. So that's the Mark's Gospel. That's a story of Jesus' life. Life that lasts is the one I've just talked about. You can come and talk to myself or Rob or any other person serving in the church, serving coffees and teas or whatever. Just talk to them about life that lasts. You can come on our Hope Explored course as well, and there are details on your tables for that, or the website. Actually, that's probably best. But here we go. My challenge is don't pass up this opportunity. Don't pass up the opportunity to grab Rob afterwards and ask him more about life. Or come on our Hope Explored, or read one of these resources. Take one of the resources at the book. But there is more to what we're living for. And his name is Jesus. Mm-hmm. And he's promised us that he is the power that raises us all from the dead on the last day. Thank you ever so much for coming here and being with us this morning. And most of all, thanks to Rob and thanks to the team who have made this possible. It is so humbling that we've been able to put on all this, from the flowers on the tables to the resources to the teas and the coffees, to Rob coming here, to the audiovisual, to those of us clocking in online. Guys, thanks so much. And can we give a real thanks to Rob this morning? Well, that's the end of our morning, but do continue to have your conversations around your tables and go and fill up from the watering hole again. Do take your time. It's lovely for you to be here.